Shippers, let's talk strategy. You've locked in your ocean freight rates, secured your allocations, but what happens next? If you don't have a structured approach to managing your logistics service providers, you're leaving efficiency and money on the table. We see it all the time. Teams stretched thin, analysts wearing too many hats, and responsibilities split between procurement and operations. And navigating complex subcontractor networks? That only adds more confusion. That's why we created the workshop called Supplier Relationship Management at KP Global Logistics Consulting, LLC. This isn't about theory, it's about real, actionable insights to help you. 1. Manage logistics service provider relationships effectively. 2. Bridge the gap between procurement and operations. 3. Build supplier strategies that deliver real results. Timing is everything. Don't wait until your volumes start moving. Build your supplier relationship management program now and position yourself for success. Spots are limited to ensure a personalized experience. Reserve your place today, and let's make 2025 your most strategic year yet. Contact Kevin Parkerson for more information.
Welcome to Kev Talks, Real World Global Logistics. I'm Kevin Parkerson.
And I'm Kevin Higgins. Together we bring you over 60 years in combined experience in global logistics.
In each episode, we'll dive into the latest industry trends, share practical tips, celebrate wins, and share stories from the logistics front lines, all while helping businesses optimize their logistics operations. Welcome to Kev Talks Real World Global Logistics. We're joined by Aron Kolosik, a seasoned business leader, supply chain expert, and transformation coach. With a distinguished career spanning leadership roles at Procter & Gamble and Central Garden & Pet, Aron has built and optimized global supply chains, driven operational excellence, and led organizations through massive transformations.
Now, as the founder of Unstuck Master Plan, he's on a mission to help executives and leaders break free from burnout, find balance, and unlock their full potential in both business and life. Aron is a visionary problem solver, a master connector, and a coach committed to empowering others. We're excited to dive into his journey and hear what he has to say. Aron, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kevs. Appreciate it.
How's that, Aron? All right, so Kolosik. I got to ask you, where's that name come from? Is it Slavic, Polish? Mine's South Arkansas. So where's yours?
South Arkansas, right? No, it's originally Bohemian. So like the old Czech Republic, like in that area. And, it's wild. Like there aren't very many of us in the world. So I always joke, like literally when you Google your name, I'm the only one that shows up. So it's kind of nice. But I think that we changed our name a few times through the years when the family arrived off the boat. So, but yeah, it's Czech Republic, Bohemian.
Well, you're
Awesome.
you're the first.
Get back to your homeland? I mean, do you ever get over there?
I lived in Switzerland twice.
That's right. Yeah.
And on my list before I got relocated both times was to get there, and I never made it. So it's still on the bucket list to actually make it there. I went all around it. Just never got there,
You should do that. Okay.
But yes, definitely on the bucket list for
Road
sure.
trip 2025. There we go.
There we go.
Okay.
Right.
Well, being the only Kolosik is great that when you Google it, unlike me, at one time there were 4 Kevin Higgins in Northwest Arkansas.
That's right.
And at one time, 3 of us were married to Debbie's.
That's
and
so
2
funny.
of us lived on roads that had cemetery in the name of the road. I used to get bills, late notices, legal notices, everything. Yes. So I commend you on having a rare name.
Though. I mean, you could kind of blame it on the other. Well, it's not me; it's the other Kevin, right?
Well, that's what they were doing. I wasn't smart enough to do that. They were blaming it on me.
I would read about that Kevin Higgins and have to call and go, "Is this you?"
Exactly.
Right? That's so funny.
I get all kinds of calls.
Well, Aron, tell our listeners, a little bit about kind of who you are and why supply chain, and we'll get into what you're doing today.
Yeah, I grew up in Iowa, and so small town Iowa, 1,000 people in my town, and went to engineering school at Iowa State. So studied chemical engineering at Iowa State, and really fell in love with being in plants to start with. Right,
Wow.
so I
Yeah.
co-opt as my sophomore year, probably saved my professional career. Tell about that in one of my podcast episodes, because I had 3 Ds on my score on my grades, and when I interviewed for the job, and I got the job before those grades came out, so I was already in.
That's awesome.
Right, so I didn't have to give the transcript again until I got done.
Yeah.
Which then it kind of spurred me on because I enjoyed being in the plant. So I loved being in a factory. And so when I was 1995, so I was not quite 19 years old. Like I fell in love with being in a factory and wanted to be a plant manager. And so kind of went back and did that assignment co-op 4 times and really got laser focused on doing that afterwards, and joined P&G in 1998 in a factory in Iowa City, Iowa. And we made shampoo conditioner there. And I loved every part of it. I liked being in operation. I listened to the people that were in the plant telling me the ideas that they had that they couldn't get, over the finish line. Like that's one of the things I pride myself in is, these ideas that are good ideas that people, again, I guess it's always been an unstuck thing, right? It's like, there's always good ideas. It's just that they can't quite get it over the edge. And I really loved making those things happen for people in the plant. And so I stayed there in Iowa City for 9 years, almost. Or 11 years, actually. So it was a long time. I was there for 11 years, got promoted to director there. I stayed there because my family's from 35 minutes southwest of there. And I married my high school sweetheart. And so we were close, and we had 2 boys that were little. And I had lost a 14-year-old brother in a car accident in the year 2000.
I'm sorry.
Which is an important part of my story, not because of the loss, but because of the stories that corporate they tell us, right? Like, hey, if you're going to get promoted to director, you're going to have to move. Like that's, you've heard that story, right?
Yeah.
And I called the bluff right then. I said, hey, great. I'm not moving till my younger brother graduates high school. And I kind of planted a flag there and said, hey, I'm taking a stand for my family. And if I don't get promoted to director, then that's great. But I found that when you put numbers on the board, it's kind of hard to argue. When you become the MVP, you're just putting numbers on the board, you're the logical next person. They're not going to hold you up. And so that being said, I knew that the senior director or the plant manager role was not going to happen at that location. So there was a time where I had to move. And prior to that, I'd got actively involved in church. And so was excited about that. But ultimately the door opened to go to Cincinnati, where I ran the portfolio program, kind of like portfolio management of all the new brands we were launching. I'm working with the customer team, sitting on the GM's lead team in North America hair care business, which was a ton of fun. I got to see for the first time, the way things happen, where these ideas come from, right? When you're in the plant, people are always like, hey, we've got this new idea. And you're like, really? Walmart must have come up with that idea, right? That must have been something, you come up, where is this from? And I could be that guy that was in between, right? I'm sure you guys have seen some of those yourself.
Yeah, of course.
And, but I did that for a couple of years, but I still wanted to be a plant manager. But they asked me to move to Switzerland to roll out a new brand to compete against Unilever and Henkel globally, because Pantene was getting their butts kicked. And so I went over there as a project manager to kind of lead this competitive response, and launched a new brand all over the world. And that was really cool, but definitely not something I wanted to do forever. Right. And, but then I wanted to be a plant manager. And so I still asked and kept pushing, and ended up in Phoenix, Arizona, making Metamucil for the world, which is an amazing product.
Thank you.
Still use it to this day. I use it to this day. But had an amazing experience there. It was my first time. I was actually seconded for the first 18 months. I worked for a company called Teva Pharmaceutical. They were my direct bosses because they were co-manning for P&G. And so I was a P&G employee working in the Teva factory for the Teva boss. And so it gave me an exposure to the outside world. And for most P&G people, working outside the matrix is a little different, right? And I went and I interviewed with the Teva vice president and said, what's operational excellence systems you want me to put in place? Lean, Six Sigma, TPM. And he said, whatever you want. And it took me a minute. Like it literally like took me back for a minute, because in P&G, that's not a, like we got a system, So
Yeah.
I was like, but then I was like, you mean I can do the things that I want to do and not do the things I don't want to do? And they're like, yeah, you can do whatever you want. I'm like, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So that was my first exposure to like having some freedom and opening up the possibility that I could be successful outside of P&G. Especially, I mean, like you, Kevin, like long time, Walmart was a long time. Like you start to wonder, you make those jumps, and can you be successful? And that led to me going back to Cincinnati after that assignment, because my oldest son wanted to play college football. And, while I loved being in Phoenix, like if he could make it in Ohio at a top school in Ohio and start and make all district and do those things, then I knew he'd have a shot.
Right.
But I wanted him to be in the right spots. We moved back to Cincinnati, and I was working on a international joint venture with that Teva pharmaceutical company. And then we bought, at that time, I was part of an acquisition, we bought Merck Consumer Health, which was all international based outside of US. So I led that integration from a supply chain perspective, the acquisition, integration, and then I ran that business, which put me into Switzerland again, where I reached a point where I had just had my son's national signing day. He was going to play football at Butler, Division I FCS. Like he was going to that next level. I'm sitting in Switzerland during COVID for 30 days at a time going, I think there's more. I can't, I'm going to miss games because I'm over here. And I'm going to, I was already feeling the pain of missing the family, and really just made a decision that it was time to make a leap and see what else was out there, just for personal reasons. And best thing I ever did. And I came to Central Garden and Pet as a chief supply chain officer there, and was there for 3.5 years. And we had a great run, and we can talk about that a little bit later, but tremendous experience working with a completely different organization and just seeing the extremes, right? Like working at P&G was very, again, the machine. It's the machine, the systems were in place, and here we were, starting from scratch in some ways. And so it was a lot of fun. But ultimately about 1.5 years ago, I started feeling this itch, to really, what really made me happy, at the end of the day. When I look back across my 30 years in supply chain, and what I realized is when I helped the manager or senior manager think of themselves differently, right? Think of the work that they were doing, or when they were presenting, when some big wig tour was coming, and they crushed it, right? And to see them grow and really just, have amazing lives like that, that's what fueled me. And so that's where Unstuck came about. And I started a program about 15 months ago to start going after that. And I loved it so much that, here the last September, as some things changed, I decided that this is what I wanted to do, full-time for the rest of my life, is just really spend this next 30 years. I've got longevity in my family. I'm 49, but I have 3 grandparents. Yeah. One of them lives down there in Northwest Arkansas.
I want to hear about that.
Yeah.
Yep.
But they're still around. So I've got a while to pay it forward, where I just really want to help others have that big brother or that mentor that they really need to get that outside paradigm. Because sometimes we're so locked into the way we see things that we can't see that the grass is greener on the other side. And I'm not talking about leaving the company all the time. That's not us. And we'll talk a little bit about that. It was just about opening your paradigm. And so that's where I'm at. So we live here now in Germantown, Ohio, which is between Cincinnati and Dayton. Mm-hmm. We bought our dream property here right during COVID, 2020. My wife had this is not the only time this has happened to me, but, we're sitting around and she said, hey, I had an idea. I looked on Google for 1 acre and a pool. And my first response was we're not looking for a house. We just built a house. And she's like, yeah, but I had this idea. And I'm like, I know how these things work. So I needed to entertain the idea. And it was, just ended up being amazing. We had 14 acres when we bought this land, with trees and deer and just amazing, beautiful property here. And then just recently we bought another 94 acres adjacent to it. So like we've got 100 plus acres here. That's just beautiful. We love being out here. Love being in the area. We're 10, 15 minutes from everything. And it's really just, it's a dream space. And so my two boys, my oldest one is working for me now on Unstuck and sales. And he worked actually for TQL for a while, being a freight broker. So he started in logistics. So you guys should be proud.
Yeah.
You know, he did some of that work and, but wanted to come help me in this journey. And then my youngest son is a student at the University of Cincinnati in architectural engineering. They're there. And then my wife is here and she's also helping me in this program and has her real estate license. We had an Airbnb down in Rogers and one up here in Ohio that we just kind of do on the side as investment properties. So that's me, guys. Like it's been a fun
That's
run.
great. I have like 10 questions in the middle of all of that, but I know Higgins has 20. So Higgins, you go.
No, I just want to. So, just the connection to Northwest Arkansas. So, did your grandparents move down here, or were they from here?
They're local. So,
nice.
Both my grandparents grew up, out towards War Eagle. So, and my uncle still lives out there. Well, I think he's in assisted living now, but my uncle Billy Sharp owned the land where the War Eagle Craft Fair is at. Yeah. So all the parking.
Small world.
I would need to check. We may be related.
You never know.
No joke.
Kevin says that to everybody.
No. I mean, you're talking about Madison County here, so you're out of War Eagle. My grandmother, my grandfather died in 1971, and my grandmother remarried in 1974. And the gentleman that she remarried, I called my grandpa because I was young. He had 157 acres on the War Eagle that he bought from Will Rogers' father-in-law, which was Blakely, and it was called Blake. So it's Blake on Blake Place Road, not too far from War Eagle Mill. I've been on the property for ever since I was a kid, and I know Billy Sharp
and Anita, and Carl.
Oh yeah. Yep. All I got to do, I'm calling my mom after this, and so I'm just gonna be like, "What's
So Anita,
where are we at?" So
we grew up going down there all the time. So like my family vacations when I was young was to go to Beaver Lake and go to War Eagle. They had a house out in LaRue, which is like out on the point, like way out there, like. But it's faster to get by boat somewhere than it is to get back in there.
Yeah, 100%.
But that's where we grew up. Like going and visiting. And and my grandma's still down there now. So she was a Sharp. And so there's still, believe it or not, there's still three of them. It's almost like Golden Girls. Yeah. But there's three of them plus Billy that are still around. Down there. That was my grandmother. We just lost my grandmother back in December. She was 97 years old. Her older sister is still living. She just turned 99. Something good about that water and the genetics there.
I'm telling you, their father lived to be 103. And I mean, there was 10 of them, 4 boys, 6 girls, and my grandma's the only girl that's gone. The rest of them are still living. So it's something about that area.
There is. I mean, there's 4 of them above 90 on my side there. It's just, and then so that's my grandma's side is the Sharp side. And then my grandfather is a roller. And so he grew up down there in, the old firehouse, on the way out to War Eagle, like that area. Yeah. But he actually grew up underneath the lake. Like his house is underwater, right? Like before they made after they made the lake. But years ago, they bought my other aunt, one of the, Mary Sharp was her maiden name, but she lived on the corner on 12.
Yeah.
Right before you go down the hill.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Like that. There's a ranch house right there.
Mm-hmm.
That was their house forever. Then my grandparents moved into there. And in 2018, I actually bought that and remodeled it and had been Airbnb-ing it for the last 5 or 6 years. We did just sell it in October. But yeah, we loved it. And we loved coming to downtown Rogers, hanging out, going to different places, the rail yard, all those places. So I've been to them all, love going down there.
Yeah. I love it. Well, we'll have to make sure and get together.
For sure.
When
the only thing we didn't like is ticks. Yeah,
jeez. The seed ticks at War Eagle are the worst.
Yeah.
Yeah, we went out on a hike out there towards the lake one time, and my wife about lost it. She's, just all over her shoestrings everywhere.
Yeah,
I'm like, that's all right. Just keep moving.
Duct tape is your friend.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
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 So that's my tie to Northwest Arkansas. So
That's
yeah,
awesome.
I definitely.
I love that. Yeah. Aaron, I love your story. And I love, kind of where you're at now. But before we get to that, I love the Northwest Arkansas, angle as well and ties. So thanks for sharing that. But let's talk a little bit about, you've led multi-billion-dollar supply chains. And what was the most complex supply chain issue you had to solve, and how did you approach it?
There's two that come to mind. One was when we bought Merck Consumer Health. It was a $1.1 billion business in 60 different countries that we needed to integrate into the P&G systems and, drive cost savings, synergies, get them all on the same page. And so part of it, at the same time is really understanding common metrics and what does success look like? And I find oftentimes we get into a project and we're just doing something versus like, well, no, what does good and what does great look like? Mm-hmm. And so getting everybody on that same page, success isn't always the timing. Sometimes it's like, you need to make sure that it's done right. And so I think on Merck Consumer Health, that was pretty complicated because you're changing sales for, order management, you're changing everything in that space. And so just having a great team and great leaders in each one of those spots that were subject matter experts, like that is the benefit of the machine that I was in, right? Like acquisitions are something that P&G's done forever. Yeah. And so having those people in those roles was super important. I think when I think about Central was a different challenge. I mean, it's a $3.4 billion company-ish, in that range, but really was built as a series of acquisitions over the last 40 years, which meant, 18 different ERPs and, 18 different metrics and different organizational structures and all of those things. But when I started there, it was in spring 2021.
Yeah.
Right. And so we all know what was going on in spring 2021, right? I mean, that's when, especially in this business, right, where ocean containers were popping up to 20,000, 30,000 a piece. We had several international businesses at that time in the space. And really the key there is, when you're going through that type of transition, for me, is really driving for stability first. Right. And there is a hierarchy of needs when it comes to KPI management, right? When you think through, you've got to get your basic needs met. And so for me, the first one was safety, right? We really needed to drive safety in that period of time when,
that's great.
I mean, you're trying to get people to come to work.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it used to be that, hey, if you have so many misses in attendance, like you're fired.
Yeah.
Not in 2021.
Yep.
I mean, you're hoping people would come to work, and so they could miss work, and it was hard, right? Like that was a hard period of time, which then meant we needed to crank up our safety. And so safety and fill rate, like customer service, were the two most important metrics. Cost savings was important, but you had to put it to the second phase, right? Because you really have to be diligent about that. And then inventories or dollars, like that has to be, your cash management had to be third. And so really getting clear with people that that's truly the case. Like, hey, we're not going to get anybody hurt. Of course, we're going to produce good quality product and ship the cases. Really helped bring everybody together with a common focus, because everybody wants to drive cost savings, but in this period of time, you're hemorrhaging. Like we really had to get people focused on what winning was. And for us right then, it was like keeping people safe and driving customer service. We didn't have an issue with quality. But that's, I think, for me, the biggest one, Kevin. It's just that whole, like, really getting laser focused on what winning looks like. It always comes back down to that.
Yeah. And how did you get, so with all the different acquisitions that have taken place, how did you bring everybody together for the common mission? Because people have we have our tendencies to have our idea of how things should go. So how did you work across that to bring people together to get laser focused on the same thing?
Good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. That's why I chose safety, because safety was inarguable.
Yeah.
And so our safety results weren't where we wanted them to be, and everybody agreed to that. And so at that point, then we set up for all of those business units safety reviews of just very simple recordable incident reviews. What happened? Why did it happen? What are we doing to make sure it doesn't happen again? And how can we quickly reapply? And so I met with every business unit, GM and leader, and we reviewed the safety results together. Because part of it was they hadn't, I wouldn't say they weren't managing safety as a metric. They hadn't been used to that. They were, it's not that it wasn't important. It wasn't that they weren't taking care of things, but it wasn't, they hadn't had the experience of like that. And so that put me in a spot where I could coach. Right. And so now all of a sudden I've got plant managers on the call with me and things that I probably wouldn't have done at P&G because I would have had somebody do it at a lower level, but I realized I had to coach and teach, like what to look for, the right questions to ask, because if you've never experienced that, the fastest way for me to do it was to take something that was something attached to the heart that it was hard to argue. Like what GM or president can say, hey, we're not going to review safety. Yeah. Like it was hard to argue. Right. Which then cracked open the door when the board of directors said, hey, our fill rates are not great. We need to really work on our fill rates. Well, now all of a sudden I have an avenue and a system like I've built some credibility, and that now allows us to just get common templates, common answers, common system, again, high level systems of just, very simple Pareto work, just to help them get their message so that we can make it easier for them. Right. But finding that commonality was the critical piece. And it worked. Our safety result dropped in half over the 3.5 years that I was there. Oh, wow. Pretty significant improvement. And I think if you'd ask anybody there today, that's one of the things that are like, yeah, Aron was pretty passionate about that.
Yeah. And I bet that built a lot of trust across the organization.
Sure. Trust, credibility. I grew up a plant guy, right? So like having been in plants, it was easy for me to ask questions because I've seen a lot, right? From 1995, I was in a plant most of those years from 95 to the end of till 2009. Right. So I think people were like, oh, this is a real guy asking real questions, not just a figurehead in the corporate role. Yeah.
Somebody with an MBA.
Yeah. That's huge.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sure through your career, Aron, I'm sure you've implemented some major technology upgrades. I'd love to get your, perspective of how do you see AI and automation reshaping supply chain for the future, the next few years?
Yeah, it's been, it was interesting coming from P&G to Central, because Central had, again, because of the very nature of it, and we did have multiple ERPs. And so in today's world and everybody's worried about SAP HANA, right? Like this upgrade to SAP HANA. Like, when is this going to happen? Like, it's been probably a decade that this has been talked about. Like, right? It's so expensive to do. So really, we looked for ERP agnostic solutions when we were thinking about the TMS or the WMS or yard management system or whatever it may be in those spaces. Because if I could do that, then I got rid of the excuse of like, well, we're a Microsoft Dynamics shop. Oh, we're still. At that time, we were still AS400 locations, still have some systems with AS400. So like when you pick an ERP agnostic tool, that really helps. But I think, the TMS was a game changer for Central, just because it took so much administrative piece of it. And you can really latch onto that as a core technology that allowed you then to move into, okay, I want, digital bill of ladings. I want to move next to that next thing. It's almost like you change the entire role of the transportation person at the warehouse. Yep. Like that changed everything, which allows you to centralize it because no longer is it based on your 20 years of experience. Like it's based on the data. And that really, I think, is the thing that's occurring, right? It's like we have these people that have done it this way for so long. We're able to now do other things. And so the challenge then becomes, what do the other people do? And my point of view has always been there's always things to do. Yeah. We will always find more ways to continuously improve. Always. Yeah. But so I think that, the TMS was a massive transition. I think, as we think through, for sure for Central, just in terms of e-com and e-commerce, like that whole, like, how do we do that faster? How do we do that? The picking with robotics and automation on that side, like sending them to the bins. And there's so much technology in that space. Yep. But one that I find to be really interesting is this last year, I actually went to Boston Dynamics. And I don't know, have you seen their dog, Spot?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like my brother-in-law works, was a VP of digital manufacturing at Nestle Purina at the time. And he worked really closely with Boston Dynamics, and like their robots walk around the factories. Like that Spot walks through the factory. It's detecting audibly for leaks. So it sees that if you have an airline leak, and think of that as just like a hose running out, right? You're spending money.
Yeah.
It can detect on the maintenance route vibrational differences between the sound of a bearing that's starting to go bad. And now it's got heat sensors that can start to see where you get hot spots and different things. And so that's next level, right?
Yeah.
It's like that's there. And then I think what's
real
coming
world,
next,
though. Yeah.
I think what's coming next is this manufacturing, I think, is ready to go through another transformation. The difference between a highly efficient manufacturing operation and an inefficient manufacturing operation is pretty large. You have systems that have run like with TPM and continuous improvement through years, like those systems hum. But then there are others who don't have that same knowledge. But I think with AI and like when I first started doing line event data systems, like when a line shut down to tell you what was happening, it was up to me to ask you, Kevin, like what happened? And then you would key it in. That's not going to be the case. Pretty quickly, we're going to get a diagnostic code and say, this is exactly what happened. And here's all the cameras that saw it. I mean, think about cameras.
Yeah.
I mean, when we first started in the game, there weren't any cameras, first of all.
Yep.
Second, when we did start to get them, like you can only get so many pictures on there, right? And then you had to download it over. I mean, it was like, it's massive change, right? And now the ability to do all that reading and technology, I think, is just phenomenal. So I think that, and then I'm also curious like where RFID goes, and again, just like the single unit tracking, like we've seen that in pharmaceuticals for years.
Yeah.
But when we think about loss and shrinkage and, like where does the product go? Like there's a lot of things that can change over the course of time here as we start getting more and more sophisticated. I mean, as you know, Walmart, like in several cases are now requiring that, and like that was a disruption this last year, like as we started to implement that in some of our categories. But, once that gets really figured out, because I would say it's not being fully used at this point in time, that'll be another game changer, right? You won't know where things are. I mean, like this, the whole story of inventory, where is it at? Like you'll know, you'll get a beacon.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on.
Yeah. You're going to see that. I mean, speaking of RFID, you're going to see that in warehouses and everything else where it starts to bring the cost of doors. The door RFID readers are going to come down because there's new technology out there that's actually doing things differently and using smaller RFID chips and actually can geofence those doors and things like that. So I think you're absolutely right. It's manufacturing and warehousing is in for some pretty significant changes in the near future.
Yeah. Which is fun, right? I mean,
it's exciting.
So, Aron, let's talk a little bit about what you're doing now. That's your supply chain world.
Yeah.
What inspired you to kind of transition from supply chain leadership into coaching, executive coaching, and what is Unstuck?
Yeah. 20 some years ago, 2001, I started doing network marketing. So I sold Advocare nutritional supplements, and I actually went to the War Eagle Fair and sold boxes of supplements at the War Eagle Fair.
Wow. Awesome.
Because I thought I was going to get rich selling supplements. And again, because I had, a young wife, a young baby, we're looking for extra income. I thought maybe that was going to be the way.
Yeah.
Like everybody a lot of people have one of those stories, right? I look at my dad, back then it was Amway, they try to do something, there's always something.
Yep.
And, but what I got out of that was actually an assessment. And this assessment actually made me look at my life holistically. It made me look at my life physically, like, hey, are you in good shape? You're not in good shape. Can you move? Can you do the things? It made me look at my relationships. Like it actually made me scale on a 1 to 10, like where am I at really with my family? Like, okay, like, because we all say it's the most important thing to us, but then if we really take the step back and say, do our actions line up with what we say?
Yeah.
You know, physically, I was in good shape back then. I was probably an 8. I was a 5 maybe on my family. Career-wise, I'm like, where's that going? I'm like, oh, we're good. You know, like that's an 8 or 9.
Yeah.
And then the next question they asked me was spiritually. And that one was a really low one. For me, it was a 2. And basically in this conference that I was in, he's like, this is the wheel that you're rolling down the road of life in. And it's like a kidney shaped thing, right?
Yeah.
And he's like, you're going to be constrained by that lowest number. You need to make that grow. And I'm like, wow. And so that set me off on a journey there. That coupled with the concept in sales of like a daily method of operation, like salespeople have to call so many people every day. They got to do this. Well, in plants, we have clean and spec lubricate checklists that we need to do every day. We had maintenance checklists that needed to be done. Like systems and processes all have, every one of those flow charts that we've always see with process management, right? Has checks and balances. I was like, well, what if I did that in my life? And I actually started putting that in place in my life. I actually have Gantt charts back to 2004 on my personal life where I was like being intentional about the different things. And it was just my thing for many, many years, until I coached my brother on it, until I coached my sons on it, and then I got exposed to another tool in 2018 that helped me diagnose some of my stories, like the stories that we tell ourselves, like, will you be successful outside of P&G? Like those stories can do 3 things for us, right? They either limit us, meaning I'm not going to ever leave P&G because I'm afraid that I won't be successful. It was a story in my head. Like I can't do it. Or I'm not getting promoted here because I don't deserve it. You're like, they're limiting beliefs, right? Like, or they pull you forward, meaning I always knew I was going to be a plant manager. I wanted to be a plant manager. No matter what I did, I was going to figure out a way. And that story like actually pulled me back. And then there's stories of how we handle adversity, right? Like when something happens, which way do you look? Do you take the glass half full or do you take the glass half empty? Right? We always have, it's a choice that you actually have, when something happens. And so I gathered a tool there and I got into a group with some men that actually challenged me and my stories. And I just saw the benefit of doing that. And, a couple years ago, I thought, I really want to do this, whether it be a small group with church or something. Like, I just feel like this is of value, because it's produced a good life for me, holistically. And I really want to help people in the space. And so I kicked off a small group, did that first. It was a course called Designing Your Future, based on the first course I ever took. And it went really well. And it really helped, the people in my group. And I thought, well, there's something to be said here in this space. And so last February 24, literally a year ago yesterday, I kicked off my first class, paid class. Wow. Because what I realized that is if you take somebody that's in leadership and it's a high achiever, if there's no skin in the game, they won't do the work. And I need them to do the work, right? I need them to do the work if they want to get the output, which is corporate growth or, growth in the corporate area, establishing the relationship with their family, getting better shape physically. Like if there's no skin in the game, like it's not meaningful enough to them. And so I did that and really just, I took another course on soul purpose, like what's my life, and I looked back on it and I thought, this is what I want to do. And so September this last year gave me the opportunity to do that, where Central took a shift and with a new CEO and some different direction, which was great. And I realized that that's not the right place for me. But both mutually, it was perfect. And I thought, this is what I want to do. And that's where I went off and we started full time on Unstuck. And so what Unstuck is it's really an operating system for life, right? I take people through ways to look at their life, ways to, through some 6 principles that I teach them, and then a systematic approach based on stuff we all learned in corporate. You always have a strategic direction, right? Like, where are we going? Why are we going? Yeah. We always have a roadmap of, where we are to where we want to go. There's always obstacles and we got to problem solve along the way because disruptions happen in the supply chain and disruptions happen in life. We got to problem solve that. How do we do that? We also have daily routines. We have daily habits, we need to have these things And then we have what I always love in operations is the plan, do, check, act, right? Like too many times people set a New Year's resolution and it's like you set it and forget it.
Oh yeah.
You know, it's like, no, it's like we want to set some targets and then we want to have a program to go after them. But things happen, you know, like sometimes you have a bad week. Sometimes, you know, like you're overwhelmed and you got too many things going on. You didn't execute very well. Instead of being like shameful and just dropping everything, if you have a good sequence, like a weekly review process on your life, you can take a look back and say, here's what I would have done different. Here's where I wouldn't have done it any different. So I'm good with it.
Yeah.
You make the adjustments and you move forward. And so that's kind of what it's just an operating system for life. That really what I've found is that one of those, that back to that first assessment, if something is out of whack in one of those 4 areas, you know, that actually could be holding you back from career growth. You just don't know it.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
and you didn't know it at the time.
So Aaron, what do you see as the most common mistake that executives make that keep them stuck?
Actually, I think that they sacrifice their family way more than they should.
Wow.
It is
way more than they think they are.
Right. And way more than they think they are.
Yeah.
You know, I recently met with somebody 2 days ago that said, hey, I just heard 2 former CSCOs that, you know, from a very big company said the thing that they regretted the most was that they made some sacrifices for their family that they wish they wouldn't have.
Yeah.
And I don't think you have to do that. I think you have to set some boundaries. I think, you know, like there are short-term sacrifices, but you better determine what's really important to you.
Yeah.
But I think that's the biggest one that I see. You know, I think.
Yeah. So what advice do you have for supply chain leaders that are struggling with that work-life balance?
Yeah, I think, you know, 2 things that I always tell people to do. It's like, one, really, you should set some boundaries, you know, with work. And what does that mean? I mean, I think setting boundaries is like a, you know, counseling term. It's like, no, it's like create some rules, in your life.
Yeah.
You know, like when you're at dinner, you're not looking at email. Like you're not going to look at email after a certain period of time or, you know, and that's, I mean, I'll give you that example. I used to have a boss that was on the East Coast when I was in Phoenix. I refused to look at my email on the way into work. It was a 30-minute drive into the plant until I got through my morning meeting, which kind of drove her crazy.
Yeah.
But the deal was I have to lead an organization. If I let her problems become my problems before I even have time to think, my thinking time is gone.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good, Aaron.
You literally eroded my thinking time in the morning. And so I set boundaries. I said, hey, here's the deal. Can we agree? And when you say it out loud, say, I will double check messages at 8:30 in the morning, right? 8:30 in the morning, my time. And I will call you if there's anything urgent. And if you need something that's really urgent, meaning that there's a fire, you need to text me and call me.
Right.
But I'm not going to respond till 8:30 because I have, in order for me to be the very best version of myself, I need to set that boundary and that rule. And we can do that at home too, right? It's like, hey, when you're at dinner, you're at dinner.
Yeah.
Get off your darn phone.
Yeah.
Like this is like, you don't have to check emails. Like emails is a thing that I think we do way, way, way too much. And everybody knows that if you batch emails, it's way better. Like that's scientifically proven. Like you're going to go through your emails better, but we love the dopamine. And so we don't set the boundary. And so you're not present. And so that's one. And then number 2, and I'm sure you guys have heard this, man, I've got 60 days of carryover vacation. Don't do that. Like that's my advice to supply chain leaders. Do not do that. That is a absolute lie.
Yeah.
Like the fact is, like it goes back to Stephen Covey, right? The 7 habits of sharpen the saw. You have to take time away. And if you are a person or a supply chain leader who has not taken your vacation and you've stood by that code of like a badge of honor, like I'm not taking any vacation.
Yeah.
I would just encourage you to take a look at it differently, right? To take a look at it as like you're out there trying to cut wood with the chainsaw blade that is completely dull.
Yeah.
And if you've ever cut wood with a chainsaw, with a dull blade,
With a dull chainsaw.
it takes forever. And then you change the chain
and it's
out.
crooked. And
it's crooked.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you change the blade, you get to sharpen it up or you get a new one. And it's like, And that's what happens when you take your vacation, if
Yeah.
you do it well. And so those are the two practical things.
I hope the listeners are really listening to that. I mean, that's Higgins. That is rest to rise is what that is.
Oh yeah. Well, I was just sitting
Right.
here thinking. I was just sitting here thinking about Lynn, and so
Yeah.
KP and I mean, we have a mutual friend. She's been on the podcast, Lynn Wong, and she said something the other day. And she just launched as a co-author of a book, and she said something the other day that's like the chainsaw analogy, but it's like you can't pour from an empty cup.
You can't.
So you have to fill your cup, and that hit me so hard that we don't. I've been that guy. I'm the guy
We
who
all
didn't
have.
take my
Yep.
vacations. I'm the guy who worked every Saturday. I'm the guy who went in at 5:30 and didn't come home till 6:30. I've been that guy. But man, you've got to refill.
Well, and there's just this piece, and I've studied a lot of this on neuroscience, right? Like Stephen Kotler, who runs this group called the Flow Research Collective, really talks about efficiency and productivity over the amount of time. And what happens is after 50 hours, your productivity actually starts to go negative
Yeah.
because you think that there's an endless amount of time. And there's a law called Parkerson's law that if like the amount of time you give yourself to actually do something is how much time it'll actually take.
Yeah.
So if you're like, oh, I got 2 hours to do it, you will jack around for the 2 hours and not get it done. But if you're like, man, I got to get this done because I got a meeting here, but like you put a deadline on it. But we do that all the time. We just let it expand. And what I'm saying is that comes to the detriment of all these other things, which it could actually fuel you. And if you're taking the time with your family and actually having joy with your family, that's more than just the rest. Like it's actually a source of fuel, right? Like when your family, like look at you as somebody that's completely present and your wife looks at you or your husband looks at you and they know that you're there and all in. I mean, how many of you, I'm sure you guys have heard this. My wife has said this to me before on Sundays. I've lost you.
Yep.
Like we're talking about something and then she's like, I've lost you.
Yeah.
That's tough. Yeah.
Well, the opposite side of that is when you get to a point where you're able to do that, like that's a source of fuel.
Yeah.
Because you know you're doing something right. And in the end, like the story we all tell ourselves, like that's what we're doing it for in the first place. We're doing it for our families.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
And there was a time not too long ago, and I think all three of us I'm the elder of all three of us.
Yes, you
But
are.
there was thanks, Katie. There was a time when we didn't have cell phones.
right.
And we went to work and we did our work and we drove home and we had dinner and it was family time. And that's all it was.
I had
because
a
there
pager
was,
then.
you had a pager. Yeah. Well, I didn't even have a pager. So, but there was a time when we didn't have that, and so we were able to be focused. And then I remember when BlackBerry started coming out and I was at Walmart, they started handing out BlackBerries to everybody. And I took mine home and I would just set mine by my landline that was hanging on the wall. And I went to work the next morning and I had somebody ask me, it's like, hey, did you see that email that I sent you at 8:30 last night? And I'm like, this was at 7:30 in the morning. I'm like, no. They're like, well, I sent it to you at 8:30 last night. Why didn't you reply? I'm like, well, because I was with my family. And they're like, no, you need to read your emails. And I'm like, yeah, unless you can call me if it's an emergency, but I'm not going to do it. And then, but they just kept going. And then the next thing you know, you're married to this thing all the time.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
it's addicting. And so we've got to be purposeful and intentional. I like how you said it. It's like, we got to be intentional about it.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, listen, Aaron, you mentioned it maybe I think a couple of times, but I want to give you an opportunity. I'd love to hear how has your faith influenced your leadership style?
Yeah. I thought about, if I think about that, I'm a theory why guy, right? And when we think about, I truly believe that every person is created for a purpose. And my job is to help figure that out and to help you figure that out too. And so when I look at people in my team and my leadership style, it is really about like helping you be the best version of you.
Yeah.
And that means exploring different things. And it's not just about the work. And I think so many times leaders look at square peg round hole and they're like, that person's not a good employee. And that's not the truth.
Yeah.
The truth is they're just in the wrong seat.
Yep.
You know, and
Yes.
so I think my approach in the theory wise / again, back to purpose and faith, like I really believe you're created for a purpose. You might just be in the wrong seat. You just didn't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And so I'm not very quick to kick somebody off the boat. I might try another seat first,
Yeah.
in that space before we make them go.
Yeah.
But I'm also at the same point saying, from a leadership perspective, like they may need to go find a different seat and it may not be in your organization. And
Yeah, that's
that's a reality. And that's the best thing you can do for them at that time versus stringing them along and having them be miserable.
Yeah.
And like, while it's hard to do, like you're doing it for like truly if you have the right mindset there. And I think for me, that's where it comes is like deep down in faith, like I'm doing the right thing for them in the long run.
Yeah.
And that's really, I think how I tie my faith into the leadership piece there.
Yeah. Right.
And
right.
things
seat.
like morals, integrity, all those other things, of course, which are normal things. But
Sure.
I think that piece of how I look at people is different because you're uniquely created.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's part of my job to help as a guide in this game is to help you find that.
Love that.
I do too. I like that, get them in the right seat. Cause a lot of times we put them in the wrong seat. So what was it? Good to great, right butt, right seat.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
if you could go back and give advice to your younger self as you start your career, what would you say?
I think I would say relax a little bit more through the years.
Did your younger self listen to you then?
I don't know. My younger son, who's 23, is kind of my younger self. I think the answer is no. But I think, my younger self, I would have said, there is a design to this thing. Things happen for a reason. And you sweating these small things or these things, like you just need to trust that things are going to work out. And if you're in a situation where you're absolutely unhappy, you don't have to stay there. Right. I stayed in a role that I was unhappy for far too long due to loyalty, due to beliefs that it was on me. I would have said, hey man, you deserve to be happy. And that's important. So don't, because when dad's not happy, the family's not happy. Right.
Yeah.
Like, and so I think I carried that for a long time and I didn't realize that probably until my mid 40s that I deserve to be happy. And that's why I tell you, it's a core, just the intentional piece is a core principle of Unstuck and being like, you deserve to be happy.
Yeah.
Because I don't think people hear that enough. And I definitely would have told my younger self that.
Oh God. Great advice. Geez, great advice. Great advice for 57-year-olds.
We all, I remind myself daily. Right.
Yeah. No, I think that's great.
Well, listen, Aaron, this conversation's been really good, packed with powerful insights. Your perspective on driving change and developing strong leaders is really exactly what the industry needs. So before we wrap up, where can listeners connect with you to learn a little bit more?
Yeah, I think there's two areas on socials: Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram at Aron Kolosik, just AronKolosik. And then I've created a free life assessment, which that's the foundational thing that changed the game for me because it helped me quantify my life, right? Because how's your marriage doing? I created a tool that helps people see, like, scale it, like where it is, like what's the number, and where that's really at. Because sometimes we're not honest with ourselves about where it's really at until we get confronted with questions that are like, is this working? Is this working? Oh, maybe I'm here.
Yeah.
And that's at unstuckmasterplan.com. It's completely free. It takes less than 10 minutes. Like if I could have the whole world take it and put it in as a KPI for themselves to just continuously work on that, that would be my life's mission, right? Just like, because I think managing against where you're really at and trying to take small steps. We don't have to do everything at once. What's the lowest, back to the customer service safety thing. Like what's the one thing that's holding you back?
Yeah.
Okay, let's just work on that one for a little bit. And so unstuckmasterplan.com is how they can get a hold of me there.
I love that.
That's great.
KP, before we go,
Yeah.
we got to bring this back around to Northwest Arkansas. I just got a text from my mother, and Billy Sharp spoke at my grandfather's funeral.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
There you go.
Wow.
There's a connection.
That's
There
awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Well, listen, Aaron, if you're ever in, or when you're in Northwest Arkansas, we've definitely got to get together. This has been really, really great. I enjoyed having you. Thanks again, Aaron. And to our listeners, if today's episode got you thinking about how to elevate your leadership or optimize your supply chain, be sure to subscribe, share, and stay tuned for more. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Nice to meet you.
You too.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Kev Talks, Real World Global Logistics. If today's discussion inspired you, don't forget to follow, subscribe, rate, and share our podcast.
Remember, every great journey in logistics starts with a single step forward. Let's continue working together to transform the industry.